Welcome. Thank you all for coming. And here we are, all together to demonstrate it is still possible to have not only civil but productive and even enjoyable, I should hope, it seems to be so far, and enlightening public discussions between differing experts on some of the most challenging issues of our time, and energy transition is certainly one of them. I'm your MC, Annemarie Rolls, and I've been delighted to support Murray in this event, and I'm going to mention Murray now because he's politely left himself off any notes, but we're all here tonight because Murray has brought the event to Melbourne. So Murray, we're going to just call you out straight up. My professional background spans marketing and communications, publishing and executive roles, building not-for-profit organisations through effective partnerships. At this stage in my career and life generally, I find myself deeply focused on how I can be part of ensuring that we have a sustainable future for the planet and its people. Becoming a grandmother certainly heightens concern about the future that awaits our children, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way. Your attendance here tonight suggests that you do and that you share these concerns, and action is certainly something that we need. So I would like to, oh, that's interesting. So, just as I mentioned before, I've come on board to support Murray in bringing the big dialogue to Melbourne. The format that we're following tonight has been a great success in Brisbane as the Brisbane Dialogues for the past 4 years, bringing people from across divides together, enabling in-depth conversations on big challenges and modelling better public discussions to inspire each other. Hopefully, this will be the first of many in Victoria and others around the country as they spread. The next one will be in Canberra on the 13th of November on an arts funding policy topic, and following another one in Brisbane on the 2nd of October on the proposed bans on social media for under 16s. So lots of interesting conversations. The Brisbane Dialogues is the country's first dedicated civil discourse on bridging organisation, with a mission to support other organisations to conduct across-the-aisle discussions on contentious topics. It also runs a schools program, Dialogues at School, and a private monthly discussion forum, and is developing several other discussion event formats for sharing with other organisations. It's an entirely independent, neutral, non-partisan, volunteer-based community organisation. The Australian Dialogues, the initiative of the Brisbane Dialogues, is an umbrella network of diverse organisations which support the principle of that across-the-aisle dialogue and are interested in or already are participating in its practice to raise the level of public discourse. If you'd like to know more, please Google Brisbane Dialogues or Australian Dialogues. Find Murray, our convener, after the discussion. Look on social media, YouTube, or there's info at brisbanedialogues.org. So, the Brisbane Rule. Based on the Brisbane Rule, we'd like to share energy transition is a complex topic that can fire people up. So this is a good time to restate the Brisbane Rule. No fisticuffs. The rule was created at the launch of the Dialogues in 2020, and the idea is to set the tone for the evening. So all participants agree to listen carefully, speak respectfully, and concentrate on the content of discussions, not on characters before, during, and afterwards, online as well as offline. So just a few housekeeping things, and I'll try and race along so we can get to the really interesting part. Mobile phones on silent, please. Fire exits, the exits are marked. Bathrooms are down, if you go straight out to your left down the hall if you haven't already found them. Please feel free to move around, go to the bar to refresh your drinks if you need to, but obviously we do that quietly so that we're not disrupting the conversation. The staff will continue to bring food around to the table as well, so that's the housekeeping. I would also like to follow a customary approach at the Big Dialogues, which is for me to say on behalf of all of you present an acknowledgement to the traditional custodians of the place on which we gather and converse. In this case, we're on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And tonight, I think it would be nice to think about something that is part of the tradition of the original owners of this land, and think about the amount of times over the many thousands of years before us where they have gathered on the banks of the Yarra River under a tree in this neighbourhood long before there was a town hall to talk about challenging issues, to share conversation about things that they're concerned about, to practice what has been termed dadiri, which is about deep listening. So the Indigenous people are amazing at taking the time to have the conversation, to have a meaningful discourse, and to try and find a way of working through their problems with patience and with good hearts. So I think it would be wonderful if we all thought about that and thought about the energy of the conversations, and this being a town hall as well, where traditionally in many cultures of all around the world, a town hall was a gathering place to sort problems out. So I hope that we can do the same and keep this ancient wisdom in mind as we listen carefully to each other. On behalf of the dialogues, I do need to say some thank yous. Many of the people who've contributed to tonight's event, especially our speakers who you're about to meet, who are all very busy people with massive jobs and who've volunteered their time and energy to support this event. Also to Scott Hargreaves and Stephen Wilson of the IPA and Andrew Hudson of CPD, the latter two also doubling up as speakers, for agreeing to collaborate with the dialogues on this event, setting a precedent for others to improve public policy discussions. To the leaders of Folio, Think Forward, Scanlon Foundation Research Institute, and the CEO, Anthea Hancocks, also doubling up tonight as our moderator, the UQ Liverer Centre, and others too numerous to mention who've helped promote the event. Our gratitude is due to the purchasers of conveners' tables, which have contributed to the cost of other seats tonight. Incitec Pivot, Clean Energy Finance Corporation, thank you, Stephen, and Charles Kiefel. And to the generous donors who made it possible to offer complimentary seats to many young people, Bill Chatterton, Dick Smith, Tony Dwyer, and the New Democracy Foundation. And of course, a huge thanks to the band of volunteers and many others who in many ways, large and small, have enabled this to happen. I think we should give them all a applause. So before I introduce the speakers, I'd like to encourage everyone to text questions to the number you can see on the screen. Yep, there it is. Succinct, relevant questions with names given may be used later. There will also be time for a few live questions from the floor, and we really welcome you to speak up. This is a conversation. So, to introduce the speakers. Firstly, Stephen Wilson. Stephen is a visiting fellow at the Institute of Public Affairs and an adjunct professor of the University of Queensland. With deep expertise in energy economics and public policy, he has contributed extensively to discussions on deregulation, climate change policies and the energy market, advocating for economically sound solutions. It's my great pleasure to introduce you this evening. Secondly, I'd like to introduce Anna Hancock. Now, don't be confused. There's two Hancocks. There's a Hancock, so it's a very popular surname tonight. But this is Anna Hancock, with no S, who is the Executive Director at Pollination Group, specialising in climate change strategy and sustainable finance. With a wealth of experience in driving innovative solutions to decarbonise economies, she also serves on the board of the Carbon Market Institute, shaping policy and market frameworks to support a low-carbon future. Our third speaker tonight is Andrew Hudson. Andrew is the CEO of the Centre for Policy Development, bringing over 2 decades of experience in policy design, research and public advocacy engagement. He's also been in senior leadership roles working with NGOs, the UN, private sector and government. And his last role was many years in New York as the CEO of Crisis Action, where he led a global team addressing some serious conflict issues around the world. So along with the rest of these speakers, we have an enormous range of experience and knowledge and expertise. So welcome to you all. And most importantly, for driving this conversation, our moderator, Anthea Hancocks. Anthea is the CEO of the Scanlon Foundation Research Institute, leading research and initiatives focused on social cohesion, migration and inclusion in Australia. With a background in strategy, leadership and community engagement, she is dedicated to fostering a more inclusive and socially cohesive society through evidence-based policy and advocacy. Thank you so much for taking this on tonight.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. And I should say that the three people sitting next to me are the most important people here tonight. So I would like to start, though, by quoting Simon Holmes-a-Court, who recently said that Australia can graduate from a dig it up and ship it out approach to a leader in the global transition to clean energy. That, with our vast array of minerals in high demand that can be processed with our low-cost clean energy, we can secure prosperity for generations of Australians to come. Tonight, we are here to be open to three different perspectives and to try to land on where we have common ground. Now, you might be wondering why I have this very interesting role to navigate this particular discussion on Australia's energy transition. Well, the ability to have respectful debates, to be comfortable with different opinions, and to recognise everyone's interest in seeking a positive future for Australia is absolutely crucial to continuing to strengthen and maintain our social cohesion. So on that particular note, I would like to get this conversation underway. And we're first going to ask each of the individuals here to take a few minutes to talk about where they sit in relation to the topic. So Stephen, across to you.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. Several years ago, I think it was a couple of years ago, I was writing something on LinkedIn, and I typed something, and then I thought, no, and I deleted it. And then I typed something else, and I deleted it. I typed something else, and I deleted it. And then I realised, hey, I'm censoring myself. And then I just decided at that moment, damn it, I'm just going to not do that anymore. I'm just going to say what I think and see what happens as an experiment. And I thought that what would happen is that I'd get attacked and vilified and all those kinds of things. And what actually happened was the opposite. And I found that about 98 to 99% of responses that I got were actually positive. I got people, some of whom I knew, some of whom I'd never met, would publicly say things that were supportive. I'd get people, some of them in very senior positions, would send me private messages and they'd say, I can't say this publicly, but please keep saying what you're saying. And then occasionally someone would come with something negative, and then I would try and engage with that person and often have some really interesting conversations. So my disposition on this very fraught topic is to just say to people, I'm not trying to convince you of my view, but just if you think I'm going wrong, please tell me where I'm going wrong. So I think the first thing that I hope we can all agree on is that freedom of speech is actually really important in the energy debate. And I think the Australian Dialogues, I want to give a big thanks to Murray as well. The Australian Dialogues is a great place to have that conversation. I think the second thing that I want to say that I hope we can all agree on is that the laws of physics are the same today as they were yesterday, and they'll be the same again tomorrow. We may not fully understand them, we may have to make adjustments in our understanding of them, but the belief is that the underlying laws themselves aren't changing, and I hope that's something we can all agree on. Einstein himself thought that the laws of thermodynamics were the most certain of all the laws, which meant that he had more confidence in them than in his own theories. And the third thing that I hope we can all agree on is that electricity, energy in general and electricity in particular, is an indispensable part of our civilizational support system. Without it, the whole of society, the whole of the modern world would basically collapse. And so I hope that we can agree on that, and I hope that we can agree that equal access to an affordable and reliable system is actually of vital importance, to everybody, regardless of their political affiliations or their beliefs. And I think that the burden of proof when we make big changes to that system has to be on those who are proposing a radically different technical solution. So there's plenty of other things I think we'll talk about tonight. I hope that we get to the point of maturity in this country where we can agree that there is no net zero without nuclear energy, but maybe that's one of the things we can talk about later. Thank you.
Well, you might as well throw it out right from the start. So, Anna, what about you?
Thank you. I have spent 25 years working in heavy industry and energy, and so I hope tonight I can bring the voice of a practitioner for some of the delicate task of balancing the different objectives of different parties and the trade-offs that are very real. At the outset, I'm very motivated to address the climate crisis and the urgent need to decarbonise. And through my career, over a decade in mining and 15 years in energy, I've taken roles that require a lot of long-term thinking, that require consideration of how durable the outcome will be, and have spent a lot of time interacting very closely with energy markets and with the exercise of forecasting. And from that vantage point, see a fantastic success story, actually, that's the deployment of the renewable assets that we already enjoy, supplying close to 40% of the energy in the East Coast system that we call the NEM, and already doing so and lowering costs. And see also a growing demand for electricity. The dominant forecast is that it will approximately double by 2050. And so even if you're not standing with me in your motivation to act on climate, there's a very real need to build out more assets to supply that power, because I agree there's a real need for reliable, fairly priced supply to power industry, to power homes. And so that build out is a point of importance. I commend the job of the bureaucrats doing the really unsexy job of analysing all the intricacies in this very complex engineering system that we think of as the power system. And I support the work that they do in building the forecasts that I'm sure we'll end up talking about, the integrated system plan and AMO's work. But I don't believe in discrediting their work. I'm a real advocate for those established and hardworking bodies doing the hard work of thinking about the future. Probably leave it there. Oh, one more thing I wanted to add. Really early on in my career, my first job, I was deployed to a nuclear mine, actually copper and uranium for BHP. And I've lived in countries that have significant nuclear industries. So I can say I'm not at the outset anti-nuclear, but there's a lot of considerations in the Australian context that make me quite sceptical of the fit, at least before 2050, and certainly the priority to continue the build out of renewables is what stands. Yeah.
Right. Well, we've already had the word agree come out, so we're making progress. So Andrew, what about you?
Great. Well, it's wonderful to be here. I'm not I'll get it out here, I'm not an expert on climate or energy transition, so I'm not quite sure why I'm on the stage. I've spent most of today talking to the media about early childhood education, which we could maybe try and draw a link to this topic, but it's pretty different. I'm a human rights lawyer by training, and have kind of worked all over the world and on different issues. I guess if I am an expert on anything, it's policy change, social change, how to convince government to make systems change. Don't stump me with the really technical sort of climate energy transition questions. But the real reason I'm here, obviously, is I'm the CEO of the Centre for Policy Development, and we do have a team of experts on energy transition. So we do a lot of work both in Australia and Southeast Asia and Indonesia on the energy transition. And I guess sort of a few of the things we've been involved in recently, just to give you a flavour of some of the things that I've been working on, along with a lot of other people in this room. Parliament just passed a law on climate disclosures, which now mandates all companies in Australia, both listed and unlisted, to essentially publicise their carbon footprint for the first time. And the theory there, is that if the public knows about the full extent of every corporate's carbon footprint, that sort of consumer sentiment and investment should drive companies to decarbonise. We've been doing quite a bit of work around the Future Made in Australia bill that's before Parliament and trying to convince government to adopt aspects of that, especially the national interest framework. And we've been doing a little bit of work with, the Climate Change Authority came out with its plan sort of last week or 2 weeks ago about sort of how we decarbonise different parts of the economy and society, and how we get to the goals we need to get to by 2035. We've been doing some work around green procurement, so how do we try and ensure that procurement is done in a way that drives down our carbon emissions. And we've been doing a lot of work on the social side of transitions, so just transitions. How do we ensure that communities and workers are brought along in the energy transition? So I guess there's some of the reasons why I'm up here. Great to be with you.
Terrific.
And I've got some things that I think we can agree on, but I didn't think I should say them now.
I was going to say, Stephen's already started by actually outlining a couple of the things that you're hoping people agree on. Is there anything in particular that you think generally there's, not necessarily just between the panellists, but a general sense of agreement around energy transition? Is there anything you think we're all pretty much on the same path with?
I think there's a lot more disagreement than agreement as a general observation. But I do think there's a dawning realisation that some of the uncomfortable truths might be true.
Okay, that's an interesting statement. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I think I'm going to disagree but agree. So I think actually there's a lot of agreement. I think most of these issues, actually, all of the things that people agree on kind of don't get focused on. And so the areas of disagreement are the ones that get amplified. But you know a lot more than me. I mean, I had a couple of things that I thought we could all agree on. We can test them. I think most people, not just us, right, in the room, I think most people agree that the energy transition needs to happen. I think most people agree, we'll see, most people agree that we do need an uptick in renewable energy and that Australia has kind of an ability to do that with its solar and wind. But we can unpack these. I don't know if this is an agreement, but emissions in Australia have peaked, right? There's some debate around how you measure that. But I think, again, that's not well talked about in the media. Rooftop installation, I think uptake of rooftop solar energy on people's roofs in Australia has been dramatic and I think outstripped most people's expectations. I think most people will probably agree that at some stage other countries are going to stop buying Australia's coal. I think most people would agree around the importance of being careful with carbon offsets, that we're not double counting carbon offsets, that we need to ensure robust compliance in place. Anyway, and the importance, I thought, of bringing along local communities, and ensuring that they're listened to. So they were some of the things that I thought most people in the room would agree with, but we'll see whether I'm wrong.
Okay, we'll check it out. So, Anna?
On that last point, I think it'd be pretty hard to find someone who thinks it's a good outcome if communities that have worked hard and served through the production of electricity or any other heavy emissions activity, I don't think anyone would suggest that it's a good outcome if they're not well looked after, that they don't get a fair go. And so I hope there's agreement that there should be significant effort put into supporting workers, supporting regions in transition. That seems like an objective that we should all get behind. I've already observed that there's rising demand, and I can talk to some of the drivers of that, but We're expecting to see more use of electricity into the future, and so how we address that through infrastructure is topical and important for the country. And a corollary of that is that the build out of transmission is actually required to meet that demand, irrespective of what you believe about renewables. Perhaps I'll leave it there and we can explore.
So, Stephen, did that go where you expected it to?
Some of those themes are fairly common themes, but I don't think that they're areas of agreement, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean the community one's an interesting one, because what we're seeing with the massive rollout of renewables across the country is that there's a whole new swathe of communities that are actually being negatively impacted by this in like a big way, and they are absolutely ropeable. I was in the DYRSL a few months ago. Dick Smith's name was mentioned earlier. Dick was one of the speakers. That was a room full of really angry farmers who had driven, some of them had driven hours and hours and hours to be in that room. And they're absolutely furious about what's being done to them and what's coming at them and the lack of consultation in that whole process.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can characterise that one region and one experience as the universal experience. There are so many uneven and different experiences, and there are communities that are advocates. And
that is very widespread across rural New South Wales. It is very widespread in rural Victoria. It is all the way up into southeast Queensland. And there were people in that room who'd come from southeast Queensland to be in that room. So it is like in Melbourne and in Sydney and in urban Brisbane, there is very limited understanding of what's actually happening.
No.
And then when you go up into the Great Dividing Range in Queensland, the reality of what is happening with the renewables rollout is horrifying.
Okay.
So just so we know, because like there's this narrative, and the narrative and the reality are two very different things.
Okay. Well, I certainly think there's nuances around that, but you're absolutely expressing very clear views that exist, and I think others would agree that communities are all at different stages in regard to this.
Well, I think the agreement there, right, is, I mean, you said exactly what I said, right? That the communities are angry because they're not being listened to. So I think we're
absolutely in agreement about that. So regardless of the methodologies, do you think, and now I know this is going to be an interesting response from you, Stephen, so I might start with Anna. Regardless of the methodology, do you think that we can meet the target of zero emissions by 2050, net zero emissions by 2050? And do you think there is a need for a sense of urgency around that?
Yes. And I don't want to sound Pollyanna about that. Like, this is a ridiculously challenging, particularly for sectors that are slow off the marks. So energy has the advantage of tremendous growth in deployment of zero emissions production, but there are other sectors that are barely starting and have much fewer options in decarbonisation. So I say yes with trepidation, but I say it because I understand the costs to nature, I understand the costs to people of the climate changes that we're already experiencing. And I think the fact that this transition is hard, the fact that it has costs, it has trade-off, it causes people pain, that's not a reason to not continue, because I see the counterfactual is devastating, and I'm not prepared to give up on my children's future. I've seen the world change so much in my half a century of life. And every decade has been progressively warmer over the last 60 years, absolutely categorically. The last 9 years have been the hottest on record, categorically. More people are dying of heat stress than has ever occurred. The impacts on nature are uncountable. The biodiversity crisis that accompanies the climate crisis is heartbreaking. And I'm not saying that as a bleeding heart. I'm saying that as an informed industrialist who wants there to be a thriving economy. But there's really no way through but through.
Yeah. So you had talked to me before this event a little bit about the urgency around electricity.
Right.
As well. So did you want to sort of address
Good
that
tip.
in
Yes,
a particular in a particular way?
Look, I just think the electricity sector specifically has got a leg up. Like, it's already in train. We know what we can do. There are existing technologies and they enable the decarbonisation of adjacent sectors. So it just makes so much sense to move further faster in a sector where you know what can be achieved.
And the demand is just going to increase.
Yes, categorically. And the electrification of applications, we can have a discussion about the role of gas. That's a very complicated topic, but there are some uses for gas that you don't really need gas for.
Yeah.
So maybe save it for the stuff that's harder to electrify. But there's a lot of different applications that will use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hang on, Stephen, because I'm.
Do you agree that electricity prices are going up?
This is a gotcha moment. Yeah, of course.
Okay.
But so is inflation. So is everything.
Right.
And the driver of the electricity price going up, there's no zero cost transition, right?
Right.
So if your choice is transition or don't transition, and don't transition is synonymous with don't decarbonise, then there's no economy in that either.
Because we're looking at a world where, so this is something where I think there maybe is increasing agreement, because you've said this is hard.
Yes.
Right. So the message until very recently was, this is really easy, this is cheap.
Yeah.
There's still people giving this message that this is cheap, right? We've still got very senior political figures and they're saying wind and solar are the cheapest, it's going to drive down bills. And it's very clear from both high quality theoretical work, some of which I've been involved with, some of which I read other people's work, and just simply observing what is happening to people's bills, that costs are going up, prices are going up. And my expectation is that if we stay on the same path, they won't go up in a straight line, they'll go up exponentially. And I'm struggling to reconcile that with the expectation that you'll have rising electricity demand. Because one of the sort of basic economic principles is that all else being equal, rising prices reduce demand. And the natural, and we're already seeing businesses being driven to closure, driven offshore. Right, so I'm struggling to reconcile this vision you're describing, Anna.
Okay, so let's just go back to the original question, which is whether or not you think we can meet net zero emissions by 2050.
Yeah.
And do you think we should?
Well, they're two different questions.
Yeah, I know.
So the first really important thing is, who is we?
Okay.
Because we keep hearing we, should, we, need. So is we, and there's this mindset in Australia that to me is really weird for a small, open, exposed economy, which is, it's sort of like, just put our heads down, work really hard, achieve this goal, and then we'll all live happily ever after. But there's a bigger world out there. So is we just Australia, or is it the whole world? Right? Because if Australia somehow heroically achieves this target, there's no guarantee that the rest of the world will do likewise.
But if we don't try, there's a guarantee that they won't, right?
No, I disagree. I think that if we do this in a way that is really expensive, that causes economic damage, that causes social dislocation, that causes political grief, people in not just China and not just India, but Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia and the Indo-Pacific, low and middle income countries will look at that and they'll go, let's not do that.
So do you think there isn't necessarily an urgency around this?
Well, let's assume for the sake of this argument that the whole sort of climate change hypothesis is correct for the sake of this argument. I think that the path we're on...
I think it's a pretty good assumption.
But I'm assuming it for the sake of the argument. My view is that if we stay on the path we're on, we're reducing the likelihood that others will follow because we're inflicting so much pain and grief on ourselves, and we're wealthy and we can afford a certain amount of damage. Not all other countries can.
So this really does bring us into the social justice type space, Andrew. Is there, can we actually balance this relationship between what Australia does and its responsibility as a global citizen? And is there an urgency in reaching this net zero?
I mean, I think we can. I think the question is Australia, right? I think that's the question. I think Australia can reach net zero by 2050. I mean, there's no plausible physical reason why we can't, I would say. Yes, I think there's urgency, but I do, and this is a very personal view, not a CPD view, I do find doomsdayism unhelpful. You know, I'm a natural optimist, and I think sort of morbid negativity isn't going to get us anywhere. I do think that we need ambition, we need positivity, we need action. And I think we can do all of those things. It's about getting different groups on board. But I think the international component has two aspects, right? I mean, the two largest coal exporters in the world are Australia and Indonesia. Australia and Indonesia are working really hard together to decarbonise. If Australia and Indonesia can decarbonise, I think that does send the message to the rest of the world that anyone can decarbonise. And I think the real issue is yes, our domestic carbon footprint isn't huge, but when you take into account our carbon footprint with everything that we export, it is very considerable. But I do think, I've spent so much time at the UN and internationally, and lots of my friends work, in all of the international negotiations, and absolutely other countries look at other countries. And so I do think that, if Australia is saying we're not going to do anything, it does give credence to other larger developing countries and saying, well, if Australia's not doing it, we're not going to do it. So I do think, there are many aspects to it.
So do you think...
There's a really important point here, which is, so on Australia's domestic coal, so it's true what you said, Andrew, that our coal exports are much, much larger than our domestic coal consumption. So all the coal that we use in the power stations in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and Western Australia is very small relative to what we export to Asia. Something like, ratio of 1 to 3 or 1 to 4, right? But, and we are the largest coal exporter in the world. I think we're again the largest, certainly by energy value and dollar value. Indonesia was bigger for a while by raw tonnes, but low quality price and energy. But Australia's total coal exports is literally a rounding error in China. China is producing and consuming, and has been for a very long time, half of the world's coal. It's like on the order of 4 out of 8 billion tonnes of the world's coal is domestically produced and domestically consumed in China. We are not exporting huge amounts of coal to China. There's some marginal imports to China on the coast for economic reasons. It's Japan that relies heavily on us, Korea, Taiwan, that has no resources, right? So that picture that you're getting from parts of the media that we're this huge coal exporter is just not correct in the global perspective. And the thing that Japan is worried about, and Japan is like probably the greenest country in Asia, the thing they're worried about is that we're going to compromise their energy security because of our energy policy settings in Australia. So these are like serious issues. So it's not like if we look at the world through a purely climate change lens, we're going to cause economic damage, political disruption, geopolitical stresses and strains, and compromise the whole security of the Indo-Pacific.
So what should we do, Stephen, if we're not looking... this conversation is all about being through a climate change lens, particularly. What are the other components? And what is it, given all of you have got international experience, what is it that's particular about Australia rather than actually making comparison with other countries in the world? What are the dynamics that happen here that should influence how we actually look at climate change?
Well, we're extremely privileged and we've got this enormous resource base. So we're long on resources and short on people. And we're sitting in a region that's long on people and short on resources. Like China's got a lot of resources, but it's got such a huge population that relative to its population, it's short on resources. Like China is one of the biggest oil producers in the world, like fourth or sixth largest or something oil producer. But they're also the world's largest oil importer, importing huge volumes. So we need to, I think we need to understand our position, we need to understand our technological capabilities and our resource capabilities, and we need to listen to the neighbouring countries about what their needs and make sure that we're getting a balance of all these things.
So you're suggesting we should maximise the use of all the resources that we've got, regardless of what they are?
We need to realise that good public policy at a domestic level and good public policy at an international geopolitical level can never be viewed in a single dimension.
Yeah. Anna, how do you feel about this?
I think it's very unlikely that you could persuade the region to decarbonise when you yourself as a nation are not, when you're in a privileged economic position as an advanced economy. I think we credit China in particular and the amount that is being constructed that is zero emissions in China. The build out is world leading presently, and I think we risk misrepresenting how quickly the economies are going to flip, and the economics are going to favour technologies that are future proof, and that sustain us in a decarbonised world.
So we are a resource rich country,
no doubt,
and we do have an awful lot of minerals in need, as Simon Holmes-a-Court mentioned. So there is a balance that has to be reached in regard to just how much we deplete those particular resources. I mean, we went through the mining tax type of approach that was not successful. At some point, rather than just thinking about solar and wind, we've actually got to think about
critical
these
minerals,
other critical minerals.
Yeah, I really agree. And there's an opportunity. We don't do a lot of processing and refining, and for some minerals there's an opportunity there, depending on the partnerships we can strike with nations, and the extent to which they can favour the maturing of those capabilities. But there's, I think, an economic reality of change that's coming anyway. And I increasingly, any argument that is a go slower, defer, is a new form of denialism. And it seems that we should be having a very grown-up discussion about a direction of travel that we're on with the climate, and a very pressing need to make the shifts today that will make tomorrow more workable.
Yeah. Andrew, just picking up on the resources side of things though, we do have a lot of them. How do we know when we've used too much? Certainly these sorts of minerals that the ones that are going to be required globally for a long time. How do you estimate generally when you're actually depleting what's available for future generations?
Well, I think certainly, I mean, we've spoken a lot about coal, but iron and steel, right, is probably just as important. Maybe aluminium as well, in terms of Australia's carbon footprint, right? The amount that, as Anna was saying, the amount that we export that is, not produced through green methods, and we do have the ability and technological know-how to start moving in that direction, and obviously. Future Make Australia is this government's attempt at boosting those industries. How do we? I don't know. I'm not an expert on how we know when minerals are sufficiently used or not in the ground. But I think it's.
But it isn't something we discuss very much. I mean, we certainly don't talk about, we should only use up to 50% of what's actually in the ground. We just keep digging.
I mean, certainly, at CPD we have a whole program on kind of, well-being economy and well-being government, and certainly trying to reuse and reduce and recycle, and it is, I think, extremely important. But I was also just going to say on Indonesia and China, I've spent quite a lot of time in Indonesia. I think regardless of what Australia does, my understanding is they are committed to the energy transition. Jokowi made decarbonisation the central theme of his presidency of G20, of his chairmanship of ASEAN. It was the central theme of his meeting here with the Prime Minister. And so, and I think, China's already met its 2030 targets for renewable installation last month. So I do think that countries in the region sort of, they are, there's a lot of money. I mean, certainly, Indonesia, I need to be careful what I'm saying here because it's filmed, but, I've seen a sense that the people that have interest in Indonesia have cottoned on to the fact that they can make a lot of money out of the energy transition. And so, yes, absolutely, these countries have enormous issues as well. But my sense is that they are convinced about the energy transition, and that it's not that Australia is having to convince them. But yeah.
So the two of the notable things the Indonesians are doing. Well, they rapidly developed their shallow coastal coal resources, a decade or two ago. They went from nowhere to the world's largest coal producer, like in the space of 10 years. They're depleting that resource. They're depleting their oil and gas resources. They used to be an OPEC member. I'm not sure whether they still are. So they've sort of gone up the ramp and along the plateau and down the other side with their coal, oil and gas. They've made it very clear to investors that if they want to develop other resources, they want to see them value add that. So that's part of the nickel story. So you've got Chinese investment in Indonesia, right? Not necessarily at a cost of production and at a volume that's forced the closure of our nickel production in Western Australia. Not necessarily like would international corporations like some of the big Australian ones, would they run those operations the way they're run? Probably not. Might not meet the environmental requirements of their investors. And then the other thing Indonesia's doing is they're doing a really big push on nuclear. So on our doorstep we've got a low-income country, low to middle-income rising country, that it has sufficient confidence in its technical capabilities to deploy that form of energy, which is without doubt the biggest decarbonisation lever that exists on the planet, and we're denying ourselves the ability to use that technology.
Okay, all right, back to nuclear.
I'm the nuclear guy.
I know.
I'm ready to talk about it. It's an interesting topic. But
well, I'm sort of related to that, because if I understand correctly, and I may be wrong, my understanding is that the proposal around introducing nuclear here was that government would own the nuclear facilities. Is that right?
That's in the official policy announcement of one of the major parties now, the coalition. Yeah.
So where should the ownership of these different components of energy transition actually sit?
That's a big question. Do you have a view on that, Anna?
It's a big dialogue.
It looks to me like it's very driven by the state and central planning, is the way it looks to me, like across the board on all this stuff.
Yeah.
Is that an area of agreement? Or do you think it's market driven, or do you think it's fundamentally state driven?
Gosh, it's such a hybrid now that I don't know how to answer that. There's definitely a mix.
Would it be done?
Are you talking about how it should be, or how?
No, how it actually is. Like, would all this invest? So if you look back to sort of from about 2010-ish, almost all the investment in new electricity generation capacity has been in wind and solar. And the question is, would any of that have happened, certainly at that kind of scale, without a set of sort of subsidy arrangements in place?
Look, I think no. When the technology was at the high end in the maturing curve and was needing to come down the cost curve, absolutely having the subsidies supported that. There's also been support for rooftop solar that has accelerated a shift in the earnings potential of legacy assets, right? And that has created openings in the market for...
What do you mean, a shift in the earnings potential of legacy assets?
So there used to be a thing called baseload. It's now an obsolete concept. That there used to be an output from a coal-fired power station, for example, that could be on and run relatively flat. With more and more rooftop solar, obviously in the middle of the day, the energy price drops and the legacy older assets are being asked to be flexible and shift down so that they don't lose money. And so that has, the occurrence of rooftop solar has changed the economics in the utility scale market as well. And that's created some space for market entry. So there's definitely, as renewables come down the cost curve and are now very low cost, even when you overlay the firming cost of extra transmission and potentially battery storage, or if it's gas-fired peaking or other firming, they're still at the lower cost end of new assets. There's because of that dynamic, there's space for private actors to be participating and moving ahead. Yeah.
So I think what we agree on here is that if you have a large amount of rooftop solar in a system, it will take a big bite, and if it has in effect preference in the dispatch order, in other words, it gets the sort of first priority in effect, then it will take away output from coal-fired power plants that were designed to run at more or less constant output. That is one of the factors that has caused the early closure of some coal plants.
Contributed to.
It's one of the contributing factors. I think we agree on that dynamic. I don't think anyone disagrees on that. The next question is whether that's a good thing. So the issue for the system is that the wind and solar can displace the coal by forcing it out the way Anna's described, but it can't replace it. So it can't do the whole job that was done by those assets. And the problem that we're starting to face now is that we don't have anything that can. So that's why I'm of the view that we're destroying the system.
But when it comes to who owns the the various components, the various assets or infrastructure or whatever it is that better done by the state initially in order to drive certain behaviours, to drive certain increase in technology or whatever it might be, or is it something where the broader population should have a stake in some components of the energy transition?
Well, I think CBD does quite a lot of work on this broader industry policy question, not just energy transition, but obviously that is kind of the main case study at the moment. And I think what we've always said is that there's a huge underinvestment in Australia, an early stage investment in R&D, and that is a unique role that government should be playing. We've got an upcoming report on this topic, sort of laying out recommendations about how government can be more involved in that early stage, getting things off the ground that require some risk and some investment. But then as you go along, I think things can change, and you do need to think about, I'm definitely not an economist, but you do need to think about comparative advantage, and we don't just want public money going to billionaires unless there's a good reason. And so, we, on Future Made in Australia, for instance, have said that we don't think it's a good idea. The government should be supporting the manufacture of solar panels here in Australia. We feel like that's not one that meets the criteria. But certainly the green metals, trying to refine iron and steel production here in Australia would, and other things like that. So, there's got to be a role for government. I mean, I guess what I would say, and I'm really not trying to be political here, but I guess over my course of working on policy reform is beware the hasty policy announcement. And I think, even if you look at Snowy Hydro, right? I mean, that was a first set and that's a renewable project, right? So this is not,
Snowy 2.
Yeah, Snowy 2. It was first supposed to be $2 billion and completed by 2021. Now estimated to cost more than $25 billion and to be completed by 2030, and even that looks ambitious.
I think that's a great example, though, of these mega infrastructure projects And there's a number of examples sort of scattered around our economy. They're not just in energy, they're rail loops and they're tunnels and other.
Yep.
And in this major infrastructure cycle that we're embarking on, for a whole lot of reasons, not just the climate transition, I have a hesitation about really expensive, really complex major infrastructure projects, and a natural tendency to see the opportunity of the smaller build out, the additional, the incremental, the projects that you can layer up, and renewables fit very squarely in that bracket.
They have until now.
I think they continue to.
I don't think they can continue. The reason they have until now is that it's been like a leverage play on existing infrastructure.
But even if you layer on the additional transmission and the firming...
That's mad. That's what you're talking about as a massive government-driven, centrally planned infrastructure investment.
No, that can be very much incremental. That you can build something and then firm it up, and you can have demand response with people participating behind the meter. You can have gas peakers, you can have batteries, you can have a whole lot of other dynamic. I think of it as like a Tetris game where you need to create a firm 24 hours, and you've got different types of assets, each playing a role and fitting into different spots.
But that's not what the ISP is. The ISP is a massive, centrally planned, preemptive construction of huge transmission. They're proposing to preemptively build transmission to designated zones so that developers will then come and put wind and solar farms in those zones. And the problem is that the economics of it's very unattractive, and the reason it's unattractive is that there's low utilisation on those assets, and when you put them through the economic test says don't build them. That's why they are saying we need to circumvent. This word has literally come out of the minister's mouth before he was the minister, praising two state ministers for circumventing the economic test. Right? And all of that investment, which is all driven by central planning, is all going to end up in the regulated asset base. So they bypass the economic test, they'll put it in the regulated asset base, it gets its guaranteed rate of return, and it's on all of our electricity bills for decades. That is the reality of what's happening.
Isn't nuclear going to be on all of our bills for decades?
So if we want to build nuclear, particularly if we want to do large nuclear, it does require a systematic, integrated, planned approach, and it almost certainly involves the state in a leading role, and that's clearly the conclusion that the coalition's come to, because that's in their policy announcement.
Yeah. For how long? Because at what point does it become privatised?
Well, the key to doing nuclear intelligently is how you finance it, and how you can amortise those capital costs over a long period of time. If you try to, so the life of those assets is at least 60 years, probably 80, some people say 100, right? So which is similar to like a hydropower plant. So if you want to make that affordable, then you just need to work out a way to finance that with very long-term financing structure so that you don't try and recover all those costs in 20 years.
So right now, trust in government is really low. I mean, relatively low. It's like 30% or something. It's not. So what is it going to take to convince the population to change regulation and a whole lot of things in order to actually accept the idea of nuclear?
Well, I think if you look at the opinion polls, something like 60% of the population's already there.
But that was an opinion poll of 1,000 people, and it's very difficult to do subgroups on 1,000. I know.
Yeah, but that's a pretty standard. 1,000 is a pretty standard sample.
It doesn't matter. It's still really hard to do the subgroup work. So anyway, quite apart from that, even if there were lots of people that were happy, they're not happy necessarily with the government making commitments and not following through.
It's an interesting question. How do we increase trust in government, which is arguably the most important institution in society? Because we elect the governments, why don't we trust them? That's a big question.
Well, we have trouble with the elections as well.
Yeah, so I think, but one of the things that I think is coming out in some of these surveys people are doing is that if you ask people, would you prefer nuclear power plants to be owned by the government or the private sector, there's a leaning to answer the government in that to that kind of question.
Yeah, there's a big underlying
fear, but
the assumption to begin with that nuclear is going to happen. But nonetheless, that's it's still an interesting thing as to who owns the energy, the aspects of the energy transition. So, Anna, from your perspective, if you were to look at the different components, renewables, nuclear, whatever, do you have a thought about what percentage of the energy that we produce should come from those different components?
the mix across all the different portfolio pieces. Look, I would only endorse the work of those projecting the different assets that might be needed, and the Australian energy market operators forecast is as good as anything that I could critique. I think in terms of, it really has to be an economically rational outcome that also addresses the decarbonisation need, because I don't think there's an alternative. I don't think that it's plausible to sit back at such a time of crisis. And I think with that backdrop, the significant build out of wind and solar, and potentially the overbuild of those assets, because they're relatively, even when firmed, cheap, means that you will have a number of assets spread in different locations that each can switch on at different times because they have exposure to different weather conditions. And you build out in that way, increasing reliability by just the diversity, the value of diversity in that portfolio. That seems like the direction of travel. The fact that it's incremental means you can build something and then learn from that and see what's missing, add that Tetris shape to complete the row, and progressively check and build from there. The question of nuclear is an interesting one. At some point, if there is an abundant, low-cost, reliable energy source that can support industry, gosh, you'd be mad to not be interested in it, right? What I don't buy is that it helps us in this immediate 20-year period where we have a very urgent need for more electricity, for decarbonisation and for cost reduction. Nuclear is a very, very distant in our regulatory environment and our construction capability. It's a very, very long-term proposition. And so I don't see that in the energy mix.
Yeah. Renewables is about 40%, you said?
Currently, yes.
Currently on the East Coast?
Yes.
Do you think it should be more than 40%?
Yeah, emphatically.
Yeah?
Yeah.
How much more?
Look, I think it is quite achievable to get very close to the government's target at 82% by 2030. It's going to be a stretch. This falls in the category of doing what's right, not what's easy. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's 75% that we hit by 2030 and not 82, but it's directionally very much in that vein. As you get closer to 90, 95%, completing it to a perfect 100% becomes really, really, really expensive. And I think there's a literacy. So much of what we read, all of us, we're consuming energy-related news on the radio, in the paper, online. So I think there's a general literacy that wasn't there 10 years ago, and that the people in this room will understand that it gets really expensive to guarantee that you will have at a very, very high renewable penetration, that you will definitely be able to handle differences between seasons, for example.
Yeah.
So I think it's more likely that we get in the order of 90%, and then it slows down a little bit, and we have some remaining gas in the system to shore us up. And then maybe there are other technologies that enter the picture. Maybe it's nuclear, whatever it is that gets us there. But once you get to such high renewable penetration, it doesn't have to be perfect that quickly. Yeah. Like, you've taken the bulk of the emissions out.
Are you willing to bet? I'm trying to find someone in this country who's willing to bet all of their personal superannuation on reaching these targets.
I'm
trying to find someone, anyone.
And
the reason I say that is what is being bet is superannuation fund money, by the way.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't think the super funds are
They're
investing.
big, absolutely.
Yeah, but they're not investing in renewables particularly. It doesn't have the risk profile.
I think you might find.
Andrew?
I don't know if I'm breaking the rules here, Murray, but what is it about renewables that you're concerned about?
They're going to crash the system. So it's a perpetual recession machine. It's going to drive the Australian economy into perpetual recession. If we continue on this path, like there's this mythological statement being put about that, we need to stop the cost of living crisis, forget about nuclear and all this other stuff. No, if we stay on this policy path, we will lock in inflation.
Is that from a reliability perspective? Sorry.
It's a reliability, it's cost, it flows through to inflation, it flows through to every consumer good, flows through the supermarkets, it hits low-income people hardest. It is really, really serious, and you can see it very clearly in good work, you can see it very clearly in the experiences of other countries around the world. Right? It is very destructive, and it's this futile attempt to sort of take this completely single-minded, not technically naive approach to solving a global problem that we're a 1-point-something% contributor to. So it's creating much bigger problems than it's solving.
Andrew, that's a challenge.
What, you want me to respond to that?
Yes.
Well,
ideally.
It's sort of depressing, isn't it? It just struck me while you were talking that, we do have very different perspectives on the problem and renewables. I don't see a downside with renewables. I don't see Australia in recession, all gloom and doom, that we've got to however much renewables we are now, whatever it is, 40% or 50%. It doesn't feel to me like we have crashed the car in the way that you're describing. So I'm just wondering, maybe it's also because we have different perspectives on climate change itself, and so therefore different kind of perspectives on the solution. I'm not sure.
I think the reason is that it's highly non-linear. So most people in their thinking extrapolate linearly in a straight line. So getting from 0% renewables to 5 to 10 probably brings down the total system cost a little bit. That's what calculations would suggest. And then as you go from sort of 10, 15, sort of to 20, 25, costs start to rise, but people don't notice too much. Now we're actually, 40 actually includes 10-ish of hydro, so we're at kind of somewhere in that 25 to 30 zone, probably closer to 30% now from wind and solar. And as you get to that zone, you start to hit saturation, and then after that, the costs just escalate exponentially. So we've seen electricity bills rise significantly, and it's become a significant political issue, but you've hardly seen anything yet. Like, you've got to understand the high non-linearity, and the reason for the non-linearity is that you've got a fundamental resource that's part-time, like in Victoria, solar's like 15% or something, 17%. In Queensland, it's like 20-something. Wind is in the 30s. So you get this very part-time resource, and you're trying to transform that into a 99.998% reliable service at the wall socket, so the lights are on and we can do this, and the football match happens, right? Well, actually, by the way, every AFL match, they've got diesel generators on all the light towers, just in case. And every hospital's got backup diesel generators. Every 5-star hotel's got backup diesel generators. And what you'll find is, if we keep going down this path, every middle-class home will have a small diesel or petrol generator. And sorry if you're poor, right? That's the world we're going to. It's highly non-linear, Andrew. And so that's why people haven't realised what's coming.
Can I just add perhaps something that I've had the privilege of seeing just by the work that I've done, spending time on coal-fired power stations? I don't think there's enough recognition of how old and frail some of these assets are. They are really set to close. Yeah, some of them.
Yeah, yep. Some of them have been well maintained and some of them haven't.
Well, there's the grandfather's axe, and if you keep replacing parts, is it a new axe story? But mostly they're ageing and they are complex to operate, and extending their life in some cases creates unsafe workplaces. They will close, and part of what's driving what you're describing in costs is also that we haven't had to build anything for a really long time, and we're having to build. And that's not just because we're building renewables, and it's not just because some people believe that it's the right thing to do to act on climate change and to equip our economy for the future. Part of that is that we're in an investment cycle because we've got ageing assets, and we haven't done the work of building transmission for a really long time.
We did a paper on this topic with Guy Debelle that some in this room know about, and I mean, that might even be something we can all agree on, right? That ageing kind of infrastructure and assets.
It's a big issue.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and it applies to the transmission assets. Like those ones that blew over down at the back of Geelong in that storm.
Yeah.
Were corroded, right? Like you looked at there were no gum trees blown over, right? There were these towers blown over, and there were no gum trees nearby damaged, as far as I could see from the photographs. And they're corroded, and so the message is that this is like all through the system.
Yep.
So let's just, as we're sort of coming to the end of the discussion, and before we move on to getting the audience to ask questions, just let's talk about the impact within communities. Because all of these assets, whether they're renewables or nuclear or whatever, are being built in communities. And those communities have to come along for the journey. I told you it was full, didn't I?
They should have, they should have screened us for whether we could drink in public, because I would have failed.
I'm just interested in when we think about, say, rural communities that are not necessarily, some rural communities have been on a long journey and embraced the idea of whatever it is they've chosen to build within their communities. Others are really having problems with the number of solar panels that have to go across kilometres of land in different places, or wind farms in oceans that are looking out on the view that they chose, those sorts of things. It is, how do we bring the communities along with us on better understanding the dynamics that you've been talking about, Stephen, better understanding what their options are, what the mix might be, what different methods can or can't do? What's the sorts of things we should do?
Well, yeah, maybe trying to be positive and kind of look. So the East Kimberley.
It hasn't been very positive.
Yeah,
just at the
so
last
I'm
bit.
trying to get us there. So the East Kimberley Clean Energy Project, I think, is a really good example. When I think of communities, if I'm being really optimistic, like one of the great things I think that we can achieve through energy transition is empowering Indigenous communities. I think that really does seem like a win-win. Some of those, Indigenous communities are located with obviously a lot of potential for solar and East Kimberley water as well. So I think there's, and some of these projects, are being done well in terms of co-creating with Indigenous communities, with First Peoples, and I think that's what Stephen was talking about earlier, right? I mean, any community that is not consulted is going to get upset, right? I mean, that's just human nature. So, I mean, and it needs to be more than consulting, right? So it really needs to be sort of co-creating, and we've learned that not just from energy transition, but from from any sort of topic. So I think that's got to be at the heart of it. The problem comes when. And that's usually the problem, I would say, right, is that the governments or companies either haven't followed through, communities have got upset, haven't been consulted. The difficulty can come if there is a genuinely good faith process and the community is against it, then what do you do? But I think actually the majority of this can be there are good examples of local communities. The Hunter Jobs Alliance is a pretty good community initiative that's well structured. A lot of these communities have got really good local governance structures in place, and they're really vocal about what they want. We did a report sort of 2 years ago and looked at all of the kind of different areas that there are really only 9 or 10 major local government authorities in Australia that are going to be most affected, but they're all extremely different, right? The Pilbara is incredibly different to Latrobe Valley, which is incredibly different to Hunter Valley. So they've all got different needs, and that's why we can't have this kind of one size all. But I think probably what this does also come down to, if you keep going down this path, is regulatory approval, and this might be another area where we can agree, or maybe we don't agree, I don't know. But the regulatory approval has been very slow in Australia, certainly in Victoria for renewables. And if you look at other places, like China or like Europe, they have put in place rules to really require regulatory approval to happen much more quickly. Now, with speed, you can then have, consultation and speed don't go well together. So yeah, there's a few thoughts.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that a little bit? Because we often, when we talk about the energy transition, we picture the big assets. We're talking about the hard choices about, are we impacting nature? Are we moving through people's communities? How do the communities feel about those developments? But today, the power system, about 15% of the power system, sometimes more, is actually behind the meter. And it's the choices that we make in energy efficiency and insulation and the appliances that we run and whether we have solar and batteries and all those sorts of things. And the inclusiveness of that part of the transition is just as important.
Yeah. Stephen?
Yeah, I think the happy renewables narrative. So I just want to say something on the I'm feeling like I'm the guilty gloom and doom guy. The narrative that I call the romantic poetry of renewable energy has a flip side, which is we're all going to die of climate change if we don't do this. That's a massive gloom and doom story.
Yeah, well, that was the doomsdayism I was referring to at the start, which I don't like.
Yeah, okay.
Which I'm probably, I can kill a dinner party with facts.
Yeah, okay. So so we always need a balance of the positive and the negative.
So assume you've got one, you've got, I don't know, Glen Iris in one spot that's all in favour of nuclear because they've got you nearby. And then you've got another community.
I don't think they are. Are they?
No, I don't think they are either. But I'm just as a scenario, hypothetical. So you've got them there, but in Box Hill they're all about, more renewables and stuff. How do you actually bring people together in that process?
Yeah, one of the very interesting observations, this has been observed in a number of countries, is that when you're close to the assets, they tend to be quite supportive. So Lucas Heights in Sydney, very supportive of nuclear. The house prices are, as high or higher near the reactor as they are in, other comparable Sydney suburbs. You find the same thing in Japan, interestingly, in the prefectures that host nuclear reactors, they're supportive. And then you go to Wyoming and you find high energy IQ, they call it. They've grown up with coal plants. You find high energy IQ in the Latrobe Valley and the Hunter Valley.
So you do some myth busting.
And people in the large, the major capital cities need to understand that I actually feel offended when we take a patronising attitude to people who might live in the Latrobe Valley or the Hunter Valley, like, oh, we got to help you poor little guys transition. No, actually those guys know more about energy than people in... Right, yeah. They understand, they know what electrons are and they know how they behave and they know what machines are.
We can agree on that.
Yeah, we can agree on that. So that's really important in this conversation, is that dialogue. Actually, there's an event in Morwell tonight, same time as this. They're talking with local communities. So this is happening right now, and that's really important.
Terrific. Great. Chris Ryan is going to help me with some questions. Is that right, Chris?
Absolutely right, Anthea. And what I'm pleased to say is there's been... Yes,
no one's asleep.
There's been some fantastic audience questions coming in. I assume all the questions have actually come from people in the room.
And are any of them directed to particular people?
A couple are, and only a few have actually given their names. But what's interesting is there's been almost 20 individuals who've put questions forward, and well over 30 questions. So the task at hand is really to try and...
Better get right.
We're not going to be able to get through all of them, so apologies and thanks to everyone for their questions. But what I'm trying to do is there's been a bit of overlap. What I would say, quite interestingly, is, and certainly in a theme that's close to your heart, Anthea, social cohesion runs through most of the questions. There are some technical questions about the capacity of the grid and how to deal with nuclear waste and so on, but a lot of the questions actually go to the heart of social cohesion, which is interesting, which is at the heart of good policy.
Yeah.
So what we see here runs the gamut from impacts on individuals to impacts and consequences and opportunities for communities and regions, and then the consequences and opportunities for the nation. So I'm going to try and just read a small sample, and you can need to stop me because we've got too many questions, and we also want to perhaps open it to the floor as things follow up. So just quickly starting with the first questions on individuals. So the costs for individuals is certainly one that comes through strongly. So could the panellists please talk about the reasons for rising electricity prices? Stephen seems to imply that this is due to transition to renewables, but I've heard about other macroeconomic factors, including war in Ukraine, and another question mentioned COVID.
Yeah,
Okay.
Do you want to have a go?
Yeah.
Yeah, have a go. Cheers. Often what ultimately sets the price in the wholesale electricity market is gas. Gas is a commodity that has absolutely blown the top off any projections that we had. I remember when gas was $3 a gigajoule, and it got up to around $30. It's had a huge impact on where the price settles and flows through the dynamics of traded pricing. I've already mentioned just the general infrastructure investment cycle that we're in and broader inflationary pressures, but also the actions of all of the participants that clip the ticket on the way through. Retailers are investing in digital platforms and, electricity retailers, all of those costs layer in. It's not just transmission build out, there's also investment in the low voltage grid. There's lots and lots of ways that costs are in the cost stack are built up.
Yeah, so you're right, and I agree with you that as we move from a system that was founded on baseload coal to a system where you've got gas setting the price in a large proportion, for a large proportion of the time, you will drive up costs and prices. And we do. The other thing that's happened, of course, is that in the last, within the last decade, we've price linked the east coast of Australia with Asian LNG markets. So it used to be, back in the day when gas was, $3 a gigajoule or even $2,
Yeah.
it was an isolated...
No one thought it would get to 10.
Oh, some of us did, yeah. It was an isolated market where, the producers could only sell to the domestic customers, and so the balance of power was much more with the customer. But in a very short space of time, a very large amount of LNG export capacity was built all on one island off Gladstone, Curtis Island, 6 trains of LNG. The volume going through those things is, I think, from memory, is double the volume of the entire East Coast market, right? So that's a huge step up. And then it's going to Asia, and it price links you with the Tokyo Bay price or the Shanghai LNG price, which then flows back into Australia and then connects back into the power system, right? So we benefit on the selling side as an exporter of LNG, but then we feel it on the electricity side.
Yep.
But if the more heavily we rely on gas as the sort of go-to last resort balancing fuel for a system that's got very volatile generation, the more we're going to feel this.
Thank you. Stephen, Andrew, did you want to make any comments about it?
Not on that one, no.
Okay,
Sure, I'll have others.
Off to another quiz.
All right, I'll move to the other theme, which is the next theme, which is more about community impacts. But just before I do, one of the things that stood out to me in the questions as worthy of comment is that they're all about, none of them are about we shouldn't take action in relation to the energy transition. They're all about how do we deal with it. So I just think it's worth pointing that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Something we all agree on.
I know we haven't got 1,000 people in the room here, but what I do know is that of the quite significant number of people who have actually put their fingers to their keyboards, that seems to be the key theme that they're not talking about.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
So on the second point about communities, So Andrew, I think, could have a view on this one. What is the role of government in removing NIMBY local community opposition? Not in my backyard, for those not familiar with that. Surely it must go beyond consultation only.
Yeah, and look, I think this is where sometimes I get frustrated, the lack of kind of lateral thinking. So, if you want to, and I guess this is where I was going before, but if let's assume you have consulted, yada, 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 how else do we get communities on board? There's got to be different creative solutions, right? Free energy, cheaper energy, other benefits. If we are asking a community to take a sacrifice, if it is indeed a sacrifice, for the benefit of the nation, then there should be rewards, and this is happening in many countries around the world, right? The UK government is considering all of these things, many other governments. So it does strike me that sometimes in Australia we don't come up with the most creative solutions, and I think government can definitely.
I was going to say, we've been slow to the party on this one, and there's been real inequality between states, the compensation paid. There's been differences in how much you are compensated if you have a wind turbine on your land rather than transmission. There needs to be more generosity in the compensation that's offered. There also just needs to be more support for information brokering. I've come across the work of RE Alliance that operates in regions that are asked to host infrastructure, that helps broker the dialogues and negotiate outcomes that are suitable for the community. There are examples of projects, transmission being built and bypassing a community that has unreliable energy supply because no one has built the step down to the low voltage system to support that local community. All those examples are unacceptable. They're not good enough. We've got to do better. And some creativity wouldn't hurt.
I do think, though, I think that the question potentially is alluding to consultation and then what? Rather than, okay, consultation, then we pay you off. So there has to be something in between those two elements.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, I thought Anna and I were sort of slightly more sophisticated than just pay them off.
You were,
but
it was still about money in the end.
Yeah, but there'd have to be plenty of other non-monetary creative solutions as well. But I think what we're saying is you need to provide incentives, right? And I think there are plenty there.
Yeah.
So, but there's a difference, isn't there, between a wind farm or a solar farm on the one hand and a transmission line on the other? Like what I think the picture I've got in my mind, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but in the case of a wind farm, you have a situation where there's a private negotiation between the developer and the landowner. And I mean, the Four Corners program picked this up, that, the farmer who negotiates with the developer to put umpteen turbines on the farm and gets a stream of payments for...
But next door misses out.
Yeah, then next door, indeed the local, I mean, the one that I remember featured there was the local community is visually affected by this. It's actually affecting the life and the livelihood of that country town, and they get nothing, and that divides people. So that's kind of divided.
Benefit sharing needs to be smarter.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. I certainly think that's something everybody agrees on completely. Chris?
I know we've got at least one question from the floor already,
yes,
but Anthea, do you want to go there, or would you like me to? I've got a great question.
Let's take this one so that maybe they might be a little quiet.
Because I'd love to come at there. We've got an absolute corker on voting rights that I would love to see asked. So, but maybe if we start this question from the floor.
I'm just seeing it. Right. Charles Kiefel, I'm not representing any position for any organisation I represent. So you obviously know that I'm on the board of the Clean Energy Regulator, so I'm not going to ask this question in my capacity as a board member. This is a personal comment, and I'm not inferring whether or not... we don't have a policy role as a regulator. I'm not giving a view as to whether Australia should go nuclear or not go nuclear. I have a personal view, which I'm not going to express tonight. However, I'll just raise a fact. In 2023, the United States, which is the largest power in the world on nuclear power, and I was just a couple of months ago speaking to some policymakers in the US, it is apolitical in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay, on nuclear power.
Correct.
Okay? And in the United States, you look at around the world, we look at self-interest as well in Australia, we have a third of the world's reserves of nuclear power. The United States is the world's largest purchaser of uranium. They have the largest industry in nuclear power.
Yeah.
So why, logically, would we not use our natural resource and our competitive advantage to sell more of our uranium to the United States? For example, in 2022, the fact check, Canada supplied the United States 27% of uranium, Russia 12%, Australia 9%, Kazakhstan 25%.
Yeah.
A name I can't pronounce with a ZUZ, you can pronounce it for me, 11%, and 6 other countries produce an aggregate of 16%, Australia only 9%, but Australia has a third of the world's uranium. Now, iron ore is a great contributor to taxation receipts in our federal trade reserves, our receipts, and I'm thinking of my fellow countrymen here. We want to be a rich country, and if we can sell our natural resources, make a lot of money out of our natural resources, rather than sit idle and unproductive in the ground, not being used, why would we not dig up the uranium that we have, a third of the world's supply, and be the dominant supplier of the United States? Now, the United States currently have got about 30 enrichment plants. They're going to build another 31 enrichment plants, according to the policymakers I met over there, in the next period of time. Why wouldn't Australia differentiate itself and become the major supplier of uranium to the United States to feed them, and therefore improve the standard of living for Australia by, I'll stop in a minute, by receiving tax revenues and tax receipts in the same way that we do for BHP and with iron ore and Rio.
Yep.
That's my point.
I think we understand.
Do you want me to?
Thank you.
So I can respond to that if you like.
Yes, please.
It's in my LinkedIn profile. I think I spent 5 years running industry analysis in the other mining company. At the time, it was the other big one. At the time, it was one of the world's major uranium producers. So the global uranium market is, it's a competitive commodity market. The thing that happened prior to the end of the Cold War, there were these two worlds, right? You had Western supply and then you had Eastern supply. It was like two completely separate worlds. The end of the Cold War, two big things happened in the uranium market. One was that it became one big market, and the other one was that there was an agreement to decommission old Soviet nuclear weapons and to downblend that material from 90% weapons-grade material to 5% reactor material, or 5 to 20% reactor material. So this huge amount of new supply came into the market, which depressed the price of uranium. The third thing that happened is that the old Soviet geologists went into the archives and realised they could turn all that knowledge about Kazakh uranium into production. So Kazakhstan is like Indonesia in thermal coal. Kazakhstan in uranium went from nowhere to the biggest uranium supplier in the world. Very, very low cost of production with in situ leaching, supplying into China and out through Russia into the rest of the world. So all of that kind of suppressed the price and made it unattractive to develop our vast reserves of uranium in Australia. That's changing now, right? So we've now got a situation where the Americans allowed themselves to become very heavily dependent on Russia for supply. They've now realised that that's a kind of geostrategic problem, and maybe it's not one big happy market, etc. So this is creating both opportunities for Australia into the medium and long term, and also I think a responsibility. If the world is going to get anywhere remotely near net zero by 2050 or even halfway there, it's going to need a lot of uranium, a lot of nuclear. That's very clear from the Dubai conference. And that is an opportunity. But having said that, this is not a get-rich-quick scheme for Australia. Like the scale of money that we will make out of exporting uranium is not like the money that we've become rich on exporting iron ore to China. I mean, this is such a tiny commodity, right? So it's more like a responsibility issue than a let's all get really wealthy issue. But having said, the other thing is, just to finish, at the moment all the enrichment capacity that turns the yellow cake from the mine and the mill into fuel rods all has to go to the Northern Hemisphere, the Western Hemisphere, to be converted, enriched and fabricated. I think that Australia is the logical place in the Southern Hemisphere to be supplying the Southern Hemisphere reactor fleet from a highly responsible, secure, well-regulated, stable economy.
And to our allies.
And to our allies.
And it brings us back to the whole basis of this conversation, which is fossil fuels versus renewables. And at some point we have to come to terms with the fact that we just keep taking stuff out we can't replace. So we have to figure out where the balance actually sits.
Fossil fuel versus renewables, be careful, because the fiberglass in the wind turbine blades is coming from oil, right? The silicon from the solar cells is being made from met coal in China. It's just that we can't see it.
It's used once. It's not continually burnt.
Yep.
And there's a return on embodied emissions that is, you pay back those embodied emissions by displacing other emissions.
But you still need I'm saying you still need the oil, the coal and the gas.
Extractive industry.
Yeah, you still need
And I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying that we have to get a balance that in actual fact future generations can live with. So that's all. Chris?
Yeah, thank you. This is a great question for the big dialogue, I think. So it's not necessarily specific to energy, but given the intergenerational trade-offs in the energy transition, should we lower the voting age or make other changes to our political system? And that's from Jules.
Great question. Andrew?
I've always been a fan of lowering the voting age. It's one of these, debates in Australia, like the criminal age. I don't understand why we can't make these changes, especially if it's voluntary. It seems like a no-brainer. I think there have been a lot of good proposals put forward on this, lowering the voting age to, say, 16 on a voluntary basis. It seems entirely sensible to me. I mean, I think the fact that you can be, convicted of a very serious crime, at 14 and go to jail. If you can be found culpable of a crime, you should be able to vote, you'd think. So we have, a range of these kind of inconsistencies in my view. But
we have a table full of students at the back, actually. From a show of hands, how many of you think they should lower the voting age? Put your hands up if you agree that they should. There you go.
Yep.
I love that. I love that the students want to vote, but but we had to wait, didn't we?
Do you want me to make it easier? Of the entire audience, by a show of hands, how many think we should lower the voting age? That's pretty good.
And those.
I think the mandatory, voluntary nuance is important as well. I think. I don't think 17-year-olds should be fined for not voting.
No.
Oh no. I agree with that. But so Anna, do you think there is a benefit in people who are likely to be around for a lot longer than perhaps me, participating more in these discussions?
It's not a topic I'd really previously sat with a lot, but I'm very alive to the very real worries that face that generation. And so the ability to equip yourself with knowledge and participate seems like a good thing.
You'll grow the support for nuclear if you reduce the voting age, because the kids are really pro-nuclear. Big time.
It's hard
really big time.
There's a lot of history we need to teach them too.
No. So they've been told they should be frightened of climate change. So I was brainwashed, like as I said in the previous Brisbane Dialogues event, I used to be anti-nuclear, and it took me 35 years to change my mind. And I was brainwashed as a teenager to be anti-nuclear. But this generation wasn't.
No.
But I think I'm not anti-nuclear. I'm here saying, great, let's have nuclear longer term to power our second half of the century of low-cost industry. But there is no universe in which nuclear comes online in Australia within 20 years.
Oh, yes, there is.
There isn't.
Yes, there is.
No.
Oh, yes, there is.
Okay, before we continue down that path, Chris, can we take one more question from this audience rather than from the ones that have been mailed in?
Yes,
so
sure.
anybody else in the room have a question? Tenant. That's right. Sorry.
Thanks very much. Tennant Reid from the Australian Industry Group. We've had a discussion that's centred almost completely on the electricity sector and the stuff that the electricity sector needs. Any quick comment or thoughts from the panel on the decarbonisation challenge in the rest of the economy? Any bit of the rest of the economy?
My brief view is that the electricity sector is the easiest thing to decarbonise, but it turns out to be quite hard. And then decarbonising the non-electricity part is really, really hard. That's my sort of brief view on that. But you're right, Tennant. Too much of the conversation where people use the word energy, they really mean electrical energy, and then they're forgetting about the rest of the energy sector, which is very substantial.
Anna, sorry.
No, go.
I was just about to agree with that.
Oh,
say,
wonderful point.
it's hard, but we've got to do it anyway. Yep.
Great, thanks. Andrew?
Well, and Tennant's organisation and my organisation actually run an initiative on this, and so we've held many roundtables, and there, for those that are like me don't really understand this that well, there are kind of 5 other main sectors, right? So agriculture and land, built environment, industry and waste, transport and resources, and the Climate Change Authority, just last week came out with plans on each of those sectors, right, and how to decarbonise them. They definitely don't get as much attention as electricity. We had a roundtable recently on agriculture and how do you decarbonise agriculture, and there's a lot of tricky conversations there. But I think in each of those sectors, I don't know if you agree, Tennant, there is progress being made. There are pathways to decarbonise, we're going to have to get onto them pretty soon.
And I would say that report is very easy to read and very available on the conversation as well. So, one more question, Chris, perhaps, from the audience? Over there?
There's a student that can't vote.
Oh.
Who has a question.
Yeah, a student who can't vote. That'd be brilliant.
Poor thing.
Is there somebody heading there with the microphone?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
Thank you very much. Saxon Taranto of Melbourne Grammar School, which perhaps isn't as inspiring as some of your accolades. Nevertheless, from what I've perceived tonight, there's essentially 2 positions presented on the panel. One that is more long-term renewable focused with an acceptance that there will be a cost, and one that is more perhaps economic focused with the ideal that we should be looking towards more current initiative solutions like nuclear energy, or perhaps focusing more on the economic burden that we'll face. I'd be curious if each party could give essentially a breaking point where perhaps the more renewable focused side could say, okay, at a certain economic point, we do have to accept that this is a bit too much. And conversely, the point where it says, oh my God, the climate's so bad that the economics are getting to a point where they're slightly negligible. I wonder if each party, even if it's not a specific number, could give an estimation of where that point might be for each of you.
I mean, perhaps I can...
Andrew? Yeah, Andrew?
I think the question is, it's a great question, thank you, but it's predicated on renewables being costly, which I think we disagree on, right? And I think actually, Stephen, you subsequently agreed that gas was driving the prices. So I don't quite agree with the predication of that renewables are costly and that there's a breaking point for the economy of a society around renewables. So I wouldn't want us to structure that dichotomy that way.
Anna?
I agree. Renewables, even the best estimate of the cost per megawatt hour of firming up the renewables is somewhere under 50 Australian dollars per megawatt hour. So even if you add that into the estimated cost of renewables, you've still got a lower cost per megawatt hour than any other newly constructed type of energy. What I would say though is that there is no zero cost transition. And so if you want to dig in and not transition, that's a sad state of affairs. And if we're going to have to do this transition, let's do it intelligently, find a way through that is optimised for readily available solutions and the lowest possible cost, and that prioritises the time value of carbon so that we're making changes as soon as we possibly can.
Stephen?
Yeah. So I think the question goes to the trade-off. Like, where's the trade-off and where does it bite? On gas, so if it's the increase in renewables that's driving gas, which then is part
We're
of it
using
driving
less
up.
gas year on year for firming, but anyway.
Yeah,
yes.
well, so that's a technical discussion. And you've got to look at the total system as a system. You can't just sort of do simple arithmetic adding. But I think that the question is the right question, which is, you know, when does, how far can you push? How far can you push this? So my view is that we're going to find that technically, I don't think that technically the system that's proposed is actually going to technically work. That is the reason that it's driving up costs, and that has a political implication that's flowing through to the politics. I don't know which of those three is going to bind first.
Yep.
Maybe two or maybe all three will bind at a very similar time. I don't know. But I think we're already seeing early signs and symptoms that there's problems coming. So we can see that in the New South Wales Premier's decision to extend the Eraring power station, right? So it's a Labor government. They've decided, yep, Eraring has to stay running for at least another 2 years, maybe 4. And we've seen it in Germany. We've seen a green energy minister in Germany instructing coal plants to run. So my prediction is that even in a scenario where we have, let's say we have a hung parliament, let's say we have a minority Labor government, let's say the Greens are dictating energy policy, let's say even in a scenario where the Greens hold the energy portfolio, when push comes to shove and the lights are going to go off, even a green energy minister will instruct the coal plants, will blame the coal plants for being old and decrepit and all the rest of it, just like they've been demonised all this time, and will instruct those guys to run so the lights don't go out, because there's not a government anywhere in the world that has survived a blackout, as far as I'm aware, in a democracy or an autocracy.
Thank you, Stephen. On that note...
on that miserable note.
Well, I was hoping it was going to be a little bit more uplifting, but nonetheless, there has been some agreement, and I think that's a very positive in relation to the topic that we're here to discuss. There's certainly been some differing ideologies. There's been differences regarding systems and benefits of infrastructure and all sorts of things, but I would like you very much to thank the panellists for enjoying such a... It has been, thank you, Annemarie, it has been an incredibly respectful and very informative discussion. So
there were no
thank you.
fisticuffs.
And over to you, Annemarie.
No fisticuffs. Everyone was so pleasant. I just have to say the number of questions that still are ready to be asked and answered, and there are a number of them, just shows that this is clearly a timely conversation and clearly a forum that we need to have more frequently, because having an interesting group of people who have so much expertise and different knowledge and different opinions, and then everyone in the room with their own thoughts, just shows that we really need to do this more often. And thank you all so much for your time, your thoughtfulness, your generosity in sharing what you think. And I think all of us will have learnt lots of things and have taken away a lot of things that we can think about. And there's certainly a lot to think about and a lot to do. So let's keep listening deeply, let's keep talking, and let's keep working on some really great solutions. I'd like to thank Anthea very much for your wonderful convening of this discussion and keeping everything moving so beautifully. And I think it is the trickiest job in so many ways. So thank you for making it work so beautifully. And to all of our panellists, thank you again. Amazing.